Good evening, I'm Shumaisa and we are joined by the Minister for Human Rights, Shireen Mazari. We're very grateful that she's taken out the time and joined us. Thank you very much, Minister, for having taken out the time. For all of you who probably know this or perhaps don't, the Ministry for Human Rights up until 2008 was part of the Ministry of Law and Justice. In 2008, this ministry was given an entity of its own. And especially right now, when the world is looking at Pakistan and we're discussing human rights, you have a lot of voices globally that are talking about the rights of journalists, the rights of missing people, the rights of women, the rights of children. This is a ministry that comes under very clear scrutiny. And so we're going to talk about all these issues. Thank you again. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you and start off with this absolutely wonderful campaign that you've started on child abuse.
Yes.
What was the impetus? Because this has been something that we've talked about in Pakistan for a very long time, but for you to actually take it on board and to take ownership of it.
First, let me clarify that the ministry actually became a ministry in 2015.
Okay.
Although a lot of people think it's now been created, because sadly, till our government came to power, this ministry really was not given the importance that we feel it should be given, because it is now a central part of many countries' foreign policies. Our whole GSP plus agreement with the EU has a very strong human rights section in it. You know, it's part of that as well. So we're glad, and I am particularly happy that the Prime Minister is giving the issue of human rights the importance that it deserves. On the child abuse campaign, we are actually beginning awareness campaigns on a number of issues, because Pakistan is in many ways an over-legislated country. We have laws, but sadly they're not being enforced. So, or people don't know about them. So we began with an awareness campaign on the inheritance rights of women, and now we have begun this campaign on child abuse. We feel children should be told what is right and what is wrong, and they should be able to tell the elders, their family or the school, if somebody is using physical abuse against them. And we've started this campaign. We also have now a Child Protection Act for Islamabad, and this campaign is part of that. So what I've started doing is actually going myself to the schools in Islamabad. We started it last week, and we will go to the public and the private schools where we show children videos on good touch, bad touch, what they should not accept, how they should tell their parents, and also trying to educate the teachers so that they're able to spot child abuse and be able, and we told the children also that they, you know, a lot of children asked, what will happen? The state, you know, there's this skepticism about laws being implemented. So I guaranteed to the students, I said, we have a helpline 1099, call on that, and I can assure you that action will be taken, and those who commit or are guilty of child abuse will be punished according to the law. So we are doing these awareness programs. A bit of a problem arises because after the 18th Amendment, all these issues have devolved.
Right.
But we hope that the campaigns we begin here will be followed up by the provinces also.
Okay, so you're taking a multi-pronged approach. You're not just raising the awareness about child abuse, you're also telling them how to deal with it.
Yes.
But very often we notice that the biggest issue we face with any of these sort of abuse cases, whether it's women or children, is there's a social taboo. Parents don't know how to communicate, and if they do, they're scared of telling other people. Very often in cases of abuse, we notice that, I would think, I don't know what the statistics exactly for Pakistan are, but I'm guessing about 80% of abuse cases are not outsiders. They're insiders, and people aren't aware of it.
Well, let me put it this way, a large proportion of the child abuse happens not by strangers, but by people that children know, and sadly also in families.
True.
And yes, the school that we went to, the teachers were really happy. They said, you know, this is a taboo subject, and for the first time the government is taking it up, but we have to protect our children. We can't protect our children if we do not give them the information and the knowledge in, of course, a sensitive way. And I think as a woman, it's easier for me to communicate with children than perhaps it would be for a male. And I think that subjects like child abuse should not be taboo. Children have to be educated, parents have to be educated, and teachers, because children spend a lot of time in schools. So that education has to come, and with that, we're using, of course, PTV, and we hope the private channels also, that they will show the videos that we have made on child awareness of child abuse, so that the public at large also becomes aware. And we are hoping that eventually we will also put up big banners in the various provincial capitals and Islamabad.
Okay, while I asked you about child abuse, you mentioned a very critical subject in Pakistan. Inheritance law already is quite a critical subject over here. Women's inheritance. It's good that your ministry has come up with this. What are the obstacles that you've seen that women generally face in our system when it comes to inheritance?
Again, family.
Family.
And what we have done is that we have in our helpline got now numbers of lawyers in different districts of Pakistan. So if any woman who's having a problem with inheritance, they can call our helpline, and our helpline will suggest the lawyer closest to her to provide pro bono legal aid and assistance. One of the biggest problems is, for example, even if the woman is given her inheritance after, say, her parents' death, for example, the brothers will make her sign away that inheritance to them. Now, that is something we have to prevent, and I am told our law ministry is working on that, so that they're going to make it difficult for brothers to
But that boils down to force and coercion, so that
no,
would not
well,
just
if
be
you
the
have
law.
a law, for example, I'm not sure exactly what law, what the final shape will be, but if you have a law that prevents a woman from selling or passing her property before the period of 1 year, then that stabilizes her control over that property. So we have to provide these legal protections. We have the laws that give the right of inheritance in accordance with Islam, but we need to ensure that that law is enforced, and for that we need additional legal measures. And we hope that we'll be able to do that quite fast, because I remember when the first cabinet meeting, the Prime Minister saying we must ensure that women get their rights of inheritance, and at that time he also raised the issue about people with disabilities being mainstreamed and how buildings must have the right. And so our disabilities bill is already gone through the assembly to the committee.
And what is the way you said you're going to put structures in place as far as the female inheritance, like for a year they cannot transfer the property?
No, we're saying that
so the
maybe
same way
laws like that.
Right, so the same way, for instance, you could perhaps introduce
the disabilities bill, when it becomes law, will make it compulsory for people with or differently abled people to have access to jobs. There will be quotas for them. Those quotas have to be fulfilled. Presently also there is a quota, but because there's no stringent law, nobody is really applying it. And another disenfranchised segment of our society, is transgenders.
True.
The previous assembly passed a law for the protection of transgenders, and nobody was taking ownership. Our ministry has now taken ownership of it, and we are moving to enforce it. One of the things we have been able to do with the cooperation of our health ministry is establish separate wards and PIMS for transgenders, and we have also committed that we will give them priority on the health card, and we will provide them free medical assistance in our government hospitals.
Okay, before I move on to other issues, all of the before mentioned issues, for me at least, it seems to me that you can put in the legislation, you can provide support, whether it's to transgenders or to children or women, the disenfranchised of society, but it seems to be a social mindset. I think there has to be a change in the way we look at things, we approach things, and that fundamentally happens through social media campaigns.
It does, but once you have a law in place, then enforcement of that law also compels people to change their attitudes. So you have to do the two together, but having a law in place gives you that strength to be able to ensure that people are protected and that social mindsets need to change. So you have the backing of the law to be able to then carry out campaigns of awareness, education and so on. But laws are essential also. So what we are doing is that where there are already many laws, we need to enforce and we need to have social awareness. But where there are lacunas, we are going to bring new legislation. For example, 2 provinces have domestic violence laws. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, unfortunately, it's still stuck. But did you know I discovered to my horror, Islamabad did not have that law. So we have now written out the bill and we have sent it to the law ministry to vet. So, because that's a lacuna that needed to be filled.
No, because I know personally, I've had women approach me in Islamabad who've had a domestic dispute with their spouse, and they've, called up the law enforcement, and they said, well, it's between the husband and the wife, and until he doesn't do something, we really can't do much.
Yes,
and so by the time something happens,
yes,
it's too late.
So that is precisely why we have now drafted a bill to ensure that domestic violence is acted against. We also, of course, by the way, we have a women's shelter that our ministry runs, and we get support from the UN also for that. So women who are in distress come to that shelter, and what we are trying to do is, with the help of the United Nations, we're trying to bring in vocational training. The traditional is teach them how to sew.
Right.
But we think computer training, training in using cooking commercially and so on. These are trades that will help them become independent.
So financial independence equates to personal and emotional independence.
It does. It gives you the strength. Otherwise, you'll be just lying in the shelter. But that doesn't help the woman regain her self-confidence, regain enough faith in herself to be able to stand on her own 2 feet. So we need to provide that mechanism also. So we're now hoping to do that.
There is a certain segment of society in Pakistan, whether it is secular or whether it is religious, that says that allowing the disenfranchised of society, for instance, whether it's transgenders or women, or even I would say as far as, teaching awareness about child abuse, they say, well, you're changing the fabric of society. You're emancipating people that shouldn't be emancipated. This is where societal changes that we don't like, and they always attribute it to modernization or westernization. What do you say to them?
No.
Because there's a lot of them who will say this.
Islam provides protection for the disenfranchised. Our religion, in the Riyasat of Medina, the Medina Charter was signed for the protection of minorities with the Jews. So what we are doing is we are going back to our roots, the spirit of Islam, which provides protection. Islam gave inheritance rights to women. Islam has given the right of divorce. Islam has given protection to children. Islam provides protection for minorities. So I really don't understand how we are going against our culture or our norms. We are trying to rectify the distortions that repression and dictatorships and extremism have brought in our society. We need to go back to our roots and to the freedoms and the rights that our religion allows us, and also, or rather gives to us, and also the vision of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Read Jinnah's statements, whether it was on human rights, whether it was anything else. In fact, on every issue almost, Quaid-e-Azam emphasized human rights of people.
Okay, the HICP has recently issued a statement. They've expressed reservation about the government's crackdown on social media. They feel that it is shutting down the voices of dissent, which is a healthy part of any democracy to a large extent. They feel that journalists, as I mentioned this, are being targeted. They feel that social activists are feeling unsafe. How is your ministry addressing this? Or what is your opinion?
I think that there is a lot of fake news and misinterpretations that are deliberately going on. The government wants to certainly take action against hate speech, especially by extremists. And by the way, hate speech is not allowed in any country under their law. And if you now look, even the EU Human Rights Court gave a judgment that blasphemy does not equal freedom of expression. This was a case that had been brought to the court by an Austrian woman, and this was an extremely landmark decision, something that we had been saying for a long time, that the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 10, does not give absolute freedom to abuse other people's religions, to abuse our Prophet, peace be upon him. And now the court gave the same thing, that blasphemy is not freedom of expression.
So for you,
so hate speech is being disallowed by all countries and their laws. I mean, in Austria, for example, if you say anything favoring, anything that reflects a critique of the Holocaust, you're put in prison. So hate speech, extremism, advocacy of violence against people because they differ with your views, this is something that all countries are controlling now. So it's not something that Pakistan, the government is doing, and we are moving in accordance with the cybercrime law, which was brought in by the last government and by the last parliament. So it's, we are enforcing the law. Either the laws, if they're bad, should be altered, or laws should be enforced.
So your definition of hate speech is anybody who is using religion to spread hate?
No,
and aside
using
from that,
any extremist viewpoint. It
viewpoint.
does not have to be just distortions of religion. Any extremist viewpoint that advocates hate and violence.
Okay. But at the same time, we also see that in Islamabad, for instance, a few months ago, if you remember, there was a protest and Islamabad was shut down for a few days, and the gentleman who was conducting this protest, this religious leader, there was immense amount of not just hate speech, but the words, the language that was used was offensive not just to the government, but to the judiciary. And we saw
the previous government and the state at that time decided not to react. But if you know that that same gentleman has now been dealt with extremely firmly and has been arrested and is in custody, and if you notice that no great disturbances have taken place. So the state has to act resolutely. So my issue is that if the HRCP feels that the arrest of that gentleman was correct because of the hate and violence he was perpetrating, then why would they object if the same sort of hate and violence being perpetrated by other extremists is not acted against? You can't be discriminatory then.
There's also been a lot of talk about the INGO crackdown. They're calling it the crackdown, although I believe the figures are that just 18.
Listen, it's absolute nonsense. I feel
I know, I have to ask you this question.
You can ask me. I can tell you. You don't even have to ask me. I'll tell you exactly what my views are on this. There's no crackdown. Every country has the right to decide which non-governmental bodies they will allow to operate, because we have our own programs and we have our own social ethos. Out of all the INGOs, 80 plus have been re-registered and they're working. 18 of them were denied registration. Some of them wanted to take up issues which are contrary to our social norms. Some of them gave, you see, they're supposed to tell us what sort of programs they're going to implement. Some of them gave programs and then they did things that were not there. They've started political interventions and political activities, or aiding and abetting certain political activities. That is not acceptable. What we do feel should be done is that those INGOs who were not re-registered should be given in writing the reasons why they were not.
Okay.
But beyond that, we're a sovereign country and it is our right to decide who will operate in this country and who will not operate in this country. It's like a work visa. How many Pakistanis are denied work visas? So it's something that is the right of the country, and we feel that we have been exceedingly open I mean, imagine 80 plus INGOs are operating in this country, funded by foreign donors.
Right.
That's a big number.
Okay, so when you say that some of them out of these 18 were not in adherence with our social norms, what social norms are we referring to?
I'm saying advocacy of certain practices which do not sort of fall in line with our religious norms, our social norms. Remember, we are the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. We are not a secular state. Although if you ask me about that, I'll tell you about the hypocrisy of so-called secular states. I can list a whole thing. I mean, let me give you one example. The Queen is the head of the Church of England and head of the state of Britain. How is Britain secular? In Germany, if you contribute to the church, you get a tax exemption. But if you contribute to your local mosque, where they're allowed, though it's difficult to, most cities may not even allow mosques, but you're not given the tax exemption. In Norway, automatically a church tax is deducted from your pay unless you give a letter saying don't deduct the tax. So I'm just giving examples of so-called secular states. Switzerland does not allow mosques. So, I mean, there is a certain hypocrisy that we confront, especially in European countries. You know, whether on religion, or I mean, you know, Muslims are denied the right to wear the dress that they want to wear in some European countries. Pakistan, for example, has at least over 15 different Christian denominations who have churches and who are present in Pakistan.
But we've also had precedents, unfortunately. You see, it's that one odd case that gets picked up, or maybe not such an odd case, but the fact is we have the precedents such as the RCRB.
Yes, we do, but I agree.
It took for us to reach, also, and the assassinations
sadly, I agree. I think there has been abuse of certain laws in Pakistan, not just on the issue of blasphemy, on a number of issues. But at the end of the day, late certainly, but justice did prevail. And by the way, you really need to be aware that the largest number of victims of blasphemy have been Muslims in Pakistan. But regardless of that, nobody should be treated unfairly or unjustly, and protection needs to be given, and we need to act against fake accusations and fake cases, fake FIRs, and this is sadly part of our decaying criminal judicial system, and part of the National Action Plan that was formulated after the APS tragedy was that the criminal judicial system would be reformed. But the previous government did not reform it, so military courts had to be extended after this sunset clause for another 2 years. And in those 2 years, the reason that all the then opposition parties, including ours, agreed to the extension of military courts was that the PML government gave a commitment that they would restructure and you know, sort of fix up the criminal judicial system. And they didn't, and they were going to give a report every month to the Parliamentary Leaders Committee. We kept pursuing it. The committee meeting was never called and no report was given, and at the end of the 2 years nothing has been done. Now we have actually started reform of the criminal judicial system, but it will take about 6 months to a year because it's a very expansive reform system. So
you're hoping to accomplish this in the next year?
Within the end, by the end of this year, certainly.
So there will be no need for the military courts.
Well, the military courts issue is going to come up.
No,
I
mean next year. Let's say you put the reforms into play.
Even now, you do realize that you need a constitutional amendment. So you would need the support of the opposition parties to get through the constitutional amendment. So in any case, again, it would be, if there is to be a constitutional amendment to extend the military courts jurisdiction, then it will have to be through political consensus.
Okay, but having said that, you do hope that there will be the changes that are required in our criminal judicial system?
No, we have started the process,
started
and I believe the law minister said within the year the criminal judicial reforms will be tabled in the parliament.
Okay, I was talking about the fact that journalists, for instance, in Pakistan is declared one of the, I think it's ranked pretty high risk for journalists. And you know, when you speak to journalists, part of it goes into the feeding frenzy, the mania.
No,
part of it is very true.
Journalists are under threat.
Okay.
And journalists often are in danger. And we are now actually, I've got the first draft of the bill. We have gotten it done. There are some weaknesses in it, so we're getting it redrafted. And hopefully by the end of this week, we will have a draft that we will share then with the Information Ministry and with other stakeholders. But the important point is that it's in the law for protection of journalists, we also feel onus has to be put on owners of media houses, print and electronic, that they need to give insurance for their working journalists, especially beat reporters. And two, they really need to train them when they're covering dangerous situations, whether it's riots, whether it's war, whatever, because neither is protective gear given, nor are they trained how to cover these situations, and that training can often be life-saving. So we think all these, other than political victimization, which should never happen of journalists, there are real issues where I think owners have to also now be brought in line, that they need to provide insurance and other protection for the people who work for them, especially beat reporters.
Journalists, the media in general in Pakistan, they do tend to feel that when you said political victimization, it's a fact that people do feel that way. People who are in this media field or journalists, they feel that specifically the media is being targeted through the withdrawing of government ads. And there is another aspect to it, but I have to ask the question.
The media has no business to be dependent on government largesse. On the one side, media wants to be independent. On the other side, they want that the government should keep pumping ads. The previous governments bought media support through giving largesse. We are bankrupt as a country. We have financial issues. Why would the government waste time on ads? Let the government's work show for itself. So why should the media demand ads from the government? This habit has to break. The media has to be, private sector has to be commercially viable. And I'm sorry, the media must do that also. And I talked about political victimization of journalists, shouldn't happen. But why should politicians be victimized also by journalists with fake stories, with allegations that are not substantiated? So, you know, fake news has become a big problem. Social media rumors start floating around which have no basis in reality. And, you know, if you tell a lie often enough, it's very difficult then. I mean, one of the tools of propaganda is if you're going to lie, give a big lie, so it takes the other side a long time to counter it. So we have a problem. Journalists also have to be ethical. If they're critiquing something, they must show some proof. There must be some valid documentation or some source that is cited, which is a viable source. So, you know, it works both ways.
Do you think perhaps, because you've mentioned this about the blasphemy law as well, now you're talking about journalists or politicians or anyone accusing the other party, perhaps we could have certain laws in place where if you wrongly accuse anyone, regardless of which area you accuse them in, that if it is not proven, then you will be held accountable.
Well, you know,
I think probably most countries.
You know, if you are held for damages if you lose a case legally, so damages should be here as well. You should be able to claim damages for wrongful accusation, but because the court system takes so long to just give you basic justice, I think people just...
But I think perhaps the fear of damages might prevent a lot of people from just saying whatever comes to their mind. I don't know
whether that would or not, seriously. But if we have one or two precedences where large amounts of damages are awarded to people with fake accusations, then, you know, it may work.
Another issue that has been discussed in Pakistan extensively since the war on terror, you know, began and Pakistan became a part of it, is the missing persons cases in Pakistan. People have demonstrated against it. People just, I think the desire, the need is for information. You know, if a loved one is missing, a person would like to know why
exactly
and for what. And I think that would also give a lot of clarity to everybody else, because if you are working against the state, then I can understand you.
There are some people have gone to extremist groups. Look,
right.
In a democratic setup, in a democratic society, you have laws, you have courts, you have in Pakistan we have anti-terror courts, we have military courts, we have laws against protection of Pakistan, we have laws anti-state. You know, people who do anti-state activities. They're very strong laws. So there is no reason for people to go missing or people to disappear. The state can arrest, they can bring them before a court of law and charge them. And that is how it is done in democratic societies. And also, the state normally has information about people who've gone to join extremist groups. The state should provide that. There are families, 10, 15 years, they don't know what's happened to their loved ones. What crime have the families committed to?
Because everybody needs some sort of closure or some sort of awareness.
We did have an interministerial meeting of the stakeholders, and there was a general agreement. In fact, there was a consensus, and I'm talking about the Law Ministry, Information Ministry, not Information, sorry, Law Ministry, Foreign Ministry, Foreign Office, Defense Ministry, Interior Ministry, Human Rights Ministry, and the Intelligence Bureau, the IB. We had a meeting of all these stakeholders.
And there was a consensus?
And there was a consensus that this enforced disappearances should be criminalized through an amendment in the PPC.
Okay.
We have done that. Now the bill has to go through all the procedures, bureaucratic procedures that every bill has to go through. So we're at the moment going through those procedures.
And what do you say to people? I'm sure that people approach your office, you know, people who have family members who are missing. And how does your...
There is also, you know, that Justice Iqbal is also heading this inquiry commission into missing persons. So he has some cases. There are lists of cases that different groups bring. We can just pass them on because our ministry does not have the investigative skills or the manpower to investigate.
You can point them in the right direction.
We can just point out in the right direction. If there are people who are now disappearing, we could perhaps inquire as to where they are. Sometimes we do get the information. But basically, again, you need the laws to be able to then ensure that something doesn't happen. Not all laws are always enforced stringently, but at least if you have the law, then you can enforce sort of in certain norms, democratic norms in a society. And I think it's very essential for the state's credibility also to be able to have these laws and to now start functioning as a democratic dispensation.
Okay, what I would like to come to as well is that you have been very sort of vociferous in the human rights violations in Kashmir, and you take a very strong stance on it. And very often when I read on social media or if I look up articles that are written abroad about you, people see you as a very hawkish Pakistani. They think that you are very, even though if anyone was to hear you views like I have right now, very sort of liberal, and you know, you take you know, a more holistic view of human rights, but you are seen as very hawkish by the rest of the world.
Look,
I wonder why.
No, it's my position on arms control and disarmament has been very categorical, that we can't have discriminatory arms control and disarmament, and with the nuclear and military cooperation between the United States and India, Pakistan has to look out for its interests, so we have every right to develop our nuclear capability, and we should continue to doing that. And of course, I have objections with the way that the international community is giving India carte blanche on the nuclear issue, and Pakistan's nuclear program is being targeted, although ours is a very small program compared to India's. So on that issue, yes, I have a very clear-cut position on that, that we need nuclear weapons, and my position has always been that. and that nuclear weapons are essential to Pakistan's defense and security. It's as simple as that, and we cannot compromise on it unilaterally. On Kashmir, of course, Indians are occupying Kashmir.
I was thinking, the reason I mentioned Kashmir is perhaps that's why, because media does play a very big role. Perhaps that's why the world, the media is fed into.
I am amazed because Kashmir is on the agenda of the UN Security Council, and people tend to forget that India took Kashmir to the UN Security Council under Chapter 6 of the Charter, not Chapter 7. If they had taken it under Chapter 7, then they could have accused us of aggression. They took it under Chapter 6, which is entitled Peaceful Settlement of Disputes, which basically means that they recognize that Pakistan was a legitimate party to the dispute, and this dispute was between two members of the UN, which they wanted the UN to resolve. So that is one issue. Secondly, look what the Indian military is doing in occupied Kashmir. Pellet guns, children are being maimed or killed. There was large-scale rape being used as a weapon of war, and those cases are in the Indian court, so it's not something I'm inventing. I mean, the Indians went into one village in Indian army, into one village in occupied Kashmir, put the men aside and raped the women in front of them. How is this not a human rights violation? This is against all humanitarian laws. In fact, because India is an occupation force in Kashmir, therefore what they are doing to the women, to the children, to the ordinary civilian Kashmiris is actually a war crime, because it comes under war crimes. And now the UN has passed so many resolutions about women in conflict areas and so on. Why is there no protection for women? Why is the world silent on what the Indians are doing in Kashmir? I mean, this is absolutely unacceptable. So yes, I have strong views and I will continue to voice them. And Indians and their supporters abroad can say what they like. But I also say we need to move towards conflict resolution. Because you can't just, Pakistan has been making statements that we support the Kashmiris diplomatically, politically, morally. But beyond that, we don't do anything. I have for the last 6 months, since we've come into government, I have been floating a proposal for a model for conflict resolution of the Kashmir dispute in keeping in mind the principle of self-determination. So I'm hoping that at some stage the government will also take that up, or at least use it as a base for forming a model. So we can go to the world and say we have a model for conflict resolution, tell the Indians to also accept it. This is what the Americans did. They forced the British to dialogue with the Irish government and the IRA over the Northern Ireland crisis. And I think that the international community owes it to the people of Kashmir to tell India to stop its human rights violations and sort of torture and what is actually state terrorism in occupied Kashmir.
I think it will take
come
a lot
to
of
the dialogue table.
It will take, what you're saying, a model, but also a lot of pressure globally for India to come to this. My final question for you: you've taught, you've been a professor, you have headed a think tank, you then joined politics, you're a minister. For you, as a woman in Pakistan, how easy or smooth has this been?
I think it's been fairly smooth, but one of the main reasons was that because I got the encouragement and support from my family from a very early age, and that really helped for me to pursue my career. But of course, there are pitfalls. Society and families are the big pitfalls. The state doesn't discriminate in that sense. If I'm a teacher and there's a male teacher, we have the same pay scales. And by the way, I want to point that out, that unlike in Western countries, we don't have discriminatory pay scales based on gender. And that's a big thing. The other thing I want to point out is that for all our faults and for all our shortcomings on human rights, Pakistan is one of those states that allows its minorities their own personal laws, which are not there in the West. We have the Hindu marriage law.
And now I think the Christian one is being
marriage
worked on.
and divorce bill is being finalized. Delay has not come from our side. It has come because the Christian groups had to agree amongst themselves, and they have a lot of problems also between the Catholics and the various Protestants. So we also need to highlight the positives that Pakistan is doing in terms of human rights, especially for its minorities, for women and so on. We have nothing to be defensive about.
But
yes,
why do we
have our faults, but we are rectifying them. The West doesn't even accept its faults.
If you look at the percentage in terms of the minorities as a percentage of the entire population of Pakistan, we have seen a decline because we've seen a lot of migration out of Pakistan in the past. And even now, if you speak to minorities in general, they do feel a sense of insecurity, especially the Hindu community. What are you doing to...
This is the problem, especially in with the Hindu community, is in Sindh.
An interior sin.
Because of the horrors of the feudal system that prevails there. And we really have to bring in law and order, use the laws that prevail to protect.
But these are the same feudals that we see as elected politicians, and then they continue. It's an age-old discussion.
Yeah, but I think things are changing. I think things are changing. And I think media, especially social media, has a lot to do with that. Now, if a girl is abused or tortured by a feudal, whether in Sindh or Punjab, immediately it comes on the social media. The state is compelled to act and so on. So I think because of the role of the media, especially social media, we will eventually...
So that aspect of social media is being encouraged.
No, I think social media is here to stay. But I think fake news, using social media for violence and extremism has to be contained also. There's no doubt about it, especially in societies which are heterogeneous, where different groups exist. We have to be able to have tolerance for the other. And tolerance means that you don't preach hatred and violence.
What has been, again, I'm going to come back to the personal because I have a few minutes left. What has been, because honestly, when I think across the board, when Pakistanis are watching this interview, especially young Pakistani girls, I feel that it's very important for them to have role models, which we do have, such as yourself, which they can aspire to, that, you know, they can actually not just imagine, but visualize what is a possibility. So having said that, what has been the hardest, aspect of your career life? Has it been politics? I'm guessing it wasn't teaching.
No.
And I'm guessing it wasn't the think tank.
No, and by the way, I've been in journalism also.
Yes, I know, you were the editor of The Nation. I know.
No, it has been in politics.
Okay.
Because sadly, the way that women politicians are treated, especially if they are assertive, I've personally been, as you know, heckled and abused by Khwaja Asif in the National Assembly.
I want to stop you there. What is the issue with the Pakistani society, or segment of it, and a woman being assertive, a woman being strong-willed, being passionate, being able to speak up? Why is that considered an unfeminine trait?
No, I think they feel threatened because we tend to be more intelligent than many of them and more articulate. But at the end of the day, young girls have to fight for their space in society. They have to first stand the pressures of the family, then they have to stand the pressures of society. And yes, but it toughens up the women. So it's good for women. And you know, now within our state structures, so many avenues are open to women that were never opened before. I mean, look at women can become fighter pilots now. I think it's a big development. So I think society is changing, and we must embrace the change, and we must encourage our women because they have to contribute to the development of the country.
They're half of our country.
And by the way, let's not forget, housewives also have a very important role to play. They bring up future generations. So let's not also undermine the role of housewives.
No, I'm not undermining their role at all, but I'm talking about...
Most societies tend to, you know, oh, you're a housewife.
I always say...
housewives play a very important role. They bring up your future generations.
And I always say it's a tough job because you don't get a bonus at the end of the year, you don't get paid leave, and you're always on duty. You don't get paid at all, you're on duty 24/7. So you would encourage other young girls to actually come into politics, to get engaged, to have a voice?
Yes, I think all women should find their voices. And by the way, one of the things should be women have to be very careful not to come under peer pressure. They need to be able to develop their individual identities and assert those identities.
So you have to swim against the tide.
Maybe.
Very often.
Maybe.
But thank you very much. Not only have you swum against the tide, but you have been very successful in doing it.
Well, thank you.
And we continue to wish you all the best. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching. You were watching an exclusive interview with Minister Shireen Mazari. And as always, we truly hope that Pakistan is headed towards a more brighter and prosperous future. Thank you. See you next time.